Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So, a Somali man arrives in Minneapolis as a new immigrant to the United States. He stops the first person he sees walking down the street and says, "Thank you, Mr. American, for letting me into this country and for the housing, food stamps, free medical care, and free education." The passerby replies, "You're mistaken. I'm Mexican." The man continues on and encounters another passerby. "Thank you for having such a beautiful country here in America," he exclaims. The person responds, "I'm not American. I'm Vietnamese." Undeterred, the new arrival walks further and stops the next person he sees. He shakes their hand and says, "Thank you for the wonderful America." That person holds up their hand and says, "I'm from the Middle East. I'm not American." Finally, he sees a nice lady and asks, "Are you an American?" She replies, "No, I'm from Africa." Puzzled, he asks her, "Where are all the Americans?" The African lady checks her watch and says, "Probably at work." So one day a beautiful fairy appeared to a poor Mexican refugee standing outside an immigration office in Arizona. She said, "Good man, I've been sent by President to grant you 3 wishes. Since you've just arrived in the United States with your wife and 8 children, I'm here to help." The man was surprised but excited. He thought for a moment and then said, "Back where I come from, we don't have good teeth. So, for my first wish, I want new teeth. Maybe even some gold ones." The fairy looked at his nearly toothless grin, waved her wand, and poof! He had a brand new set of shiny gold teeth. The fairy smiled and asked, "What else?" "You still have 2 more wishes." Feeling a bit bolder, the man said, "For my second wish, I want a big house. A mansion with a 3-car garage in Annapolis, right on the water. 8 bedrooms for my family and the rest of my relatives who are still back home. I want to bring them all over here." The fairy waved her wand again, and poof! In the distance appeared a magnificent mansion with a 3-car garage, a long driveway, and a patio overlooking the bay. The fairy said, "You have 1 more wish." "What will it be?" The man thought about it and said, "I want to be like an American. I want American clothes instead of these old ones, and a baseball cap instead of this sombrero. And I want to have white skin like Americans." Fairy waved her wand one last time, and poof! The man was suddenly wearing worn-out jeans, a Baltimore Orioles t-shirt, and a baseball cap. His gold teeth were gone, replaced by his old ones, and the mansion disappeared from sight. Panicking, the man cried out, "What happened to my new teeth? Where's my house?" The fairy looked at him and said, "Amigo, now that you're a white American, you have to fend for yourself." So Dr. Calvin Rickson, a scientist from Texas A&M University, proudly announced his latest invention. A bra that prevents breasts from jiggling and stops nipples from poking through fabric in cold weather. At the press conference unveiling his breakthrough, a large group of men promptly dragged him outside and kicked the daylights out of him. So 2 guys are speeding through Texas when a state trooper pulls them over. The trooper walks up to the driver's side, pulls out his billy club, and smacks the driver across the face. Stunned, the driver yells, "Why did you do that?" The trooper replies, "You're in Texas now, son. You better have that license out and ready around here." "I'm sorry, sir," the driver says, rubbing his face. "I'm not from around here." The trooper then walks around to the passenger side, taps on the window, and when the passenger rolls it down, he smacks him across the face too. "What the heck was that for?" the passenger shouts. The trooper calmly responds, "I know your kind." About 2 miles down the road, you'd have turned to your buddy and said, "I wish that bastard would have tried that with me." So, an American businessman was standing at the pier of a small coastal Mexican village when a fisherman docked his boat. Inside were several large yellowfin tuna. The American complimented the fisherman on the quality of his catch. "How long did it take you to catch them?" the American asked. "Only a little while," the Mexican replied. "Why don't you stay out longer and catch more fish?" the American inquired. "I have enough to support my family's immediate needs," said the Mexican. "But what do you do with the rest of your time?" the American asked. The fisherman smiled and said, "I sleep late, fish a little, play with my children, take a siesta with my wife, Maria, stroll into the village each evening where I sip wine and play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life, sir." The American scoffed. "I have an MBA from Harvard, and I could help you. You should spend more time fishing. With the extra fish, you could buy a bigger boat. With the profits from the bigger boat, you could buy several boats. Eventually, you'd have a whole fleet. Then," he continued, "instead of selling your catch to a middleman, you could sell directly to consumers, maybe even open your own cannery. You'd control the product, processing, and distribution. You'd need to leave this small village and move to Mexico City, then LA, and eventually New York City, where you'd run your expanding empire." The fisherman asked, "But sir, how long would this take?" "Oh, about 15 to 20 years, the American replied. "And after that?" the fisherman asked. The American grinned. "That's the best part. When the time is right, you'd announce an IPO, sell your company stock to the public, and make millions." "Millions?" the fisherman asked. "Then what?" the American said. "Then you'd retire. Move to a small coastal village where you could sleep late, fish a little, play with your kids, take a siesta with your wife, stroll to the village in the evenings, sip wine, and play guitar with your amigos." So a Russian tourist in New York found himself needing to get rid of a large supply of garbage from his recent stay at an apartment. After a long search, he just couldn't find any place to discard of it. So, he just went down one of the side streets to dump it there. Yet, he was stopped by a police officer who said, "Hey you, what are you doing?" "I have to throw this away," replied the tourist. "You can't throw it away here. Look, follow me," the policeman offered. The police officer led him to a beautiful garden with lots of grass, pretty flowers, and manicured hedges. "Here," said the cop, "dump all the garbage you want." The Russian shrugs, opens up the large bags of garbage, and dumps them right on the flowers. "Thanks for giving me a place to dump this stuff." "This is very nice of you. Is this American courtesy?" asked the tourist. "No," replied the cop. "This is the Russian embassy." So, at an international gynecologist's convention, 2 American doctors and a European doctor were having drinks and talking about work. After a few too many, they started telling stories. The first American decides to talk about the strangest patients he had had. "This woman's vulva was like an apple," he explained. The second American shakes his head. "That's nothing. I had a patient with a vulva like a peach." The European doctor, not wanting to be outdone by his new American friends, said, "We too talk about this. I found a woman with one like a watermelon." The first American laughs, and the second American frowns and says, "That's impossible. How would she walk?" The European doctor looks puzzled before saying, "Oh, you Americans, always obsessed with size. I thought we were talking about flavor." So 3 women are chatting, a French, an American, and a Russian. The French says, "After we got married, I told my husband right away that I was not going to cook, do dishes and laundry, or clean the house. He disappeared. I didn't see him for a day, 2, 3, then he came back with a housemaid. Now she does all that, and I just sit and relax all day long." The American says, "Well, after we got married, I told my husband the same. Didn't see him for a day, 2, 3, then he came back with some big appliance. Now it does all that automatically, and I just sit and relax all day long." The Russian says, "After we got married, I told my husband that I wouldn't do all that either. I didn't see him for a day, 2, 3. On the 4th day, I was finally able to see something with my right eye." So Russian President Putin called President Donald Trump with an emergency. "Our largest condom factory has exploded." Putin cried, "This is a disaster. It's our people's favorite form of birth control." "Mr. Putin, the American people would be happy to help in any way we can." Trump replied, "I need your help," said Putin. "Could you send us 1 million condoms as soon as possible?" "Of course. I'll take care of it right away," Trump said. "Oh, and one more small favor, please," Putin added. "Yes. Could the condoms be red, at least 10 feet long, and 4 feet in diameter?" Putin asked. "No problem," Trump replied, and hung up to call the president of the condom company. "I need a favor," Trump said. "Send 1 million condoms to Russia immediately." "Consider it done," said the president of the condom company. "Great, but they have to be red 10 feet long and 4 feet wide." "Easily done. Anything else?" "Yeah," said Trump. "Make sure you print Made in America, size small, on each one." So the train was quite crowded. So the U.S. Marine walked its entire length looking for a seat, but the only seat left was taken by a well-dressed, middle-aged French woman's poodle. The war-weary Marine asked, "Ma'am, may I have that seat?" The French woman just sniffed and said to no one in particular, "Americans are so rude. My little Fifi is using that seat." The Marine walked the entire train again, but the only seat left was under that dog. "Please, ma'am, may I sit down? I'm very tired." She snorted. "Not only are you Americans rude, you are also arrogant." This time, the Marine didn't say a word. He just picked up the little dog, tossed it out the train window, and sat down. The woman shrieked, "Someone must defend my honor. Put this American in his place." An English gentleman sitting nearby spoke up. "Sir, you Americans often seem to have a penchant for doing the wrong thing. You hold the fork in the wrong hand. You drive your autos on the wrong side of the road. And now, sir, you've thrown the wrong bitch out the window." So when Osama bin Laden died, he found himself at the pearly gates, where he was immediately met by George Washington. Washington slapped him across the face and shouted, "How dare you try to destroy the nation I helped build?" Next, Patrick Henry stepped forward, punched him in the nose, and yelled, "You wanted to take away our liberties, but you failed." James Madison followed, delivered a swift kick to his groin, and declared, "This is why I ensured our government could provide for the common defense." Then Thomas Jefferson appeared, wielding a long cane. He struck bin Laden repeatedly and growled, "It was men like you who inspired me to write the Declaration of Independence." One by one, George Mason, James Monroe, and 66 other early Americans took turns unleashing their fury on the terrorist leader. As Osama lay on the ground, battered and bleeding, an angel appeared. Through his pain, he wept and said, "This isn't what you promised me." The angel shrugged and replied, "I told you there would be 72 Virginians waiting for you in heaven. What did you think I said?" So groups of Americans were traveling by tour bus through Switzerland. As they stopped at a cheese farm, a young guide led them through the process of cheese making, explaining that goat's milk was used. She showed the group a lovely hillside where many goats were grazing. "These," she explained, "are the older goats put out to pasture when they no longer produce." She then asked, "What do you do in America with your old goats?" An old American gentleman answered, "They send us on bus tours." So Jay Fulmer, age 38, yesterday became the first American to get to grips with the concept of irony. "It was weird," Fulmer said. "I was in London and talking to this guy, and it was raining, and he pulled a face and said, 'Great weather, eh?' And I thought, wait a minute, no way is it great weather." Fulmer then realized that the other man's mistakes was in fact deliberate. Fulmer, who is 39 next month and married with 2 children, aged 8 and 3, plans to use irony himself in future. "I'm, using it all the time," he said. "Last weekend I was grilling steaks, and I burned them, and I said, 'Hey, great weather.'" So an English tourist arrived in Texas. He stepped off the bus in Fort Worth and asked, "Where's a good place to eat?" A local replied, "Right down the road is a men's club." The tourist didn't realize that the club boasted a swimming pool, a workout room, indoor squash, and racquetball courts. He simply walked through the restaurant door and said to the waitress, "Miss, bring me a steak and a Coke." The waitress brought out a mug that was 12 inches wide and 1.5 feet tall. The man exclaimed, "I just wanted a Coke, not the whole factory." She responded, "Mister, this is Texas, and everything's bigger here." Soon, she returned with his steak, which overflowed on all sides of a massive, sizzling platter. He said, "Miss, I just wanted a steak, not the whole cow." Again, she replied, "Mister, this is Texas, and everything's bigger here." After finishing his meal, he asked the waitress, which way to the restroom. She directed him, "It's down the hall, 3rd door on the right." Distracted, the man turned into the 3rd door on the left instead, and with one step, fell into the swimming pool. "Help! Help!" he screamed. "Don't flush it." So the elderly American gentleman arrived in Paris by plane. At French customs, he fumbled for his passport. "You've been to France before, monsieur?" the customs officer asked sarcastically. The old gent admitted that he had been to France previously. "Then, you should know enough to have your passport ready for inspection." The American said, "The last time I was here, I didn't have to show it." "That is impossible. You Americans always have to show your passports on arrival in France." The American senior gave the Frenchman a long, hard look. Then he quietly explained, "Well, when I came ashore at Omaha Beach on D-Day in '44, I couldn't find any Frenchman to show it to." So little David comes home from 1st grade and tells his father that they learned about the history of Valentine's Day. Since Valentine's Day is for a Christian saint and we're Jewish, He asks, "Will God get mad at me for giving someone a Valentine?" David's father thinks a bit, then says, "No, I don't think God would get mad." "Who do you want to give a Valentine to?" "Osama bin Laden," David says. "Why Osama bin Laden?" his father asks in shock. "Well," David says, "I thought that if a little American Jewish boy could have enough love to give Osama a Valentine, he might start to think that maybe we're not all bad, and maybe start loving people a little bit. And if other kids saw what I did and sent Valentines to Osama, he'd love everyone a lot. And then he'd start going all over the place to tell everyone how much he loved them and how he didn't hate anyone anymore." His father's heart swells, and he looks at his boy with newfound pride. "David, that's the most wonderful thing I've ever heard." "I know," David says, "and once that gets him out in the open, the Marines could blow the crap out of him." So times were tough across America as the recession hit everyone hard. You could see the signs everywhere, from Wall Street to Main Street. Just the other day, I opened my mailbox to find something I'd never seen before, a pre-declined credit card. Can you imagine? It was like the universe was telling me, don't even bother. Things were so bad that wives were actually having sex with their husbands because they couldn't afford batteries. Even CEOs, once kings of the corporate world, had downgraded their lifestyles to the point where they were playing miniature golf just to keep their spirits up. ExxonMobil had to make some tough cuts too. They laid off 25 congressmen. That's when you know it's serious. Then there was the tragic story of a stripper who met an untimely end when her audience, trying to be generous, showered her with rolls of pennies. It's a hard knock life, indeed. I even saw a Mormon polygamist the other day, and guess what? He was down to just one wife. Tough times, my friend, tough times. People were getting desperate. When the bank returned my check marked insufficient funds, I had to call them up and ask, "Are you talking about me or you?" McDonald's, always trying to adjust with the times, started selling a new item, the quarter ouncer. And in a surprising turn of events, Angelina Jolie adopted a child from America. Even the elite in Beverly Hills weren't spared. Parents had to fire their nannies, and for the first time, they actually learned their children's names. My cousin, who had been dealing with some personal issues, went so far as to get an exorcism. But when she couldn't afford to pay for it, they repossessed her. It's no wonder, then, that a truckload of Americans was recently caught sneaking into Mexico. The tables have truly turned, and in these hard times, even the old saying has changed. A picture is now only worth 200 words. Everyone's cutting back. When Bill and Hillary Clinton traveled together, they've had to start sharing a room to save on costs. And the Treasure Island Casino in Las Vegas? It's now being managed by Somali pirates. But perhaps the most ironic twist of all is Congress looking into the Bernard Madoff scandal. The same people who managed to make $1.5 trillion disappear are now investigating the guy who made $50 billion vanish. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. And finally, I was so depressed last night thinking about the economy, wars, jobs, my savings, Social Security, retirement funds, everything. So, I called the suicide hotline. I was expecting some comfort, but instead, I got a call center in Pakistan. When I told them I was suicidal, they got all excited and asked if I could drive a truck. So an American, a Scot, and a Canadian were in a terrible car accident. They were rushed to the emergency room, but sadly, all three passed away on the way. Just as the staff were about to put a toe tag on the American, he suddenly stirred. Shocked, The doctors and nurses gathered around him and asked what had happened. "Well," said the American, "I remember the crash, then seeing a beautiful light. The next thing I knew, the Canadian, the Scot, and I were standing at the gates of heaven. St. Peter came over and told us that we were all too young to die. He said if we each made a donation of $100, we could return to Earth. So, of course," he continued, "I pulled out my wallet, handed him the $100, and here I am." "That's incredible," one of the doctors exclaimed. "What happened to the other two?" The American shook his head and said, "Last I saw, the Scot was trying to negotiate the price, and the Canadian was waiting for the government to cover his." So, 2 foreign nuns had just arrived in the USA by boat, and one says to the other, "I hear that people in this country actually eat dogs." "Really?" her companion replies. "Well, if we're going to live here, we might as well do as the Americans do." Nodding in agreement, the Mother Superior points to a hot dog vendor, and they both walk over to the cart. "2 dogs, please," the Mother Superior says. The vendor happily hands them 2 wrapped hot dogs. Excited, the nuns hurry over to a bench to unwrap their dogs. The Mother Superior opens hers first. She turns red, staring at the hot dog for a moment, then leans over to the other nun and whispers, "What part did you get?" So an American sniper was excellent at his job, and he had a unique method. He would yell out an insult at the enemy, and when someone stood up to respond, bang! One less insurgent. After every mission, the company commander would ask, "How many insurgents did you take out today?" But on this particular day, when asked, the sniper replied, "5 killed, sir." "Let one go," the commander roared. "What do you mean you let one go?" The sniper shrugged and said, "Well, sir," I yelled, "Osama is a bastard." Then this big insurgent stood up and shouted, "Hillary is a dumb old hag." I just couldn't shoot a fellow Republican. So 3 men are traveling in the Amazon, a Canadian, an American, and a Mexican. They get captured by a fierce tribe of Amazons. The tribe leader informs them they will be whipped for trespassing. He turns to the Canadian and asks, "What do you want on your back for your whipping?" The Canadian replies, "I'll take oil." So they apply oil to his back, and a strong Amazon whips him 10 times. When it's over, the Canadian is left with huge welts and can hardly move. The Amazons then turn to the Mexican. "What do you want on your back?" The Mexican proudly declares, "I want nothing. I'll take my punishment like a real man." He stands tall and endures the 10 lashings without flinching. Finally, it's the American's turn. The tribal chief asks, "What will you take on your back?" The American grins and says, "I'll take the Mexican." So a man is walking through Central Park in New York when he suddenly sees a little girl being attacked by a pit bull. Without hesitation, he runs over, fights the dog, and manages to save the girl. A nearby police officer rushes over and says, "That was incredible. You're a hero. Tomorrow, you'll be all over the newspapers. Brave New Yorker saves young girl's life." The man shakes his head. "But I'm not a New Yorker." The officer nods. "Well, then it'll say brave American saves girl's life." The man smiles and says, "Actually, I'm Pakistani." The next day, the headline reads, "Islamic extremist kills innocent American dog." So, a U.S. Marine squad was marching north of Fallujah when they stumbled upon a chaotic scene. On one side of the road lay an injured Iraqi insurgent. unconscious and severely wounded. On the opposite side, an American Marine, though also hurt, was still conscious and alert. As the squad medics began administering first aid to both men, the squad leader knelt beside the Marine and asked, "What happened here?" The Marine, grimacing but still in good spirits, replied, "Well, I was armed to the teeth and heading north on the highway, and coming south was this heavily armed insurgent. We spotted each other and both took cover in the ditches on either side of the road." The squad leader nodded, listening closely as the Marine continued. I yelled over to him, "Saddam Hussein was a miserable, low-life scumbag who got what he deserved." And he shouted back, "Ted Kennedy is a fat, good-for-nothing, left-wing liberal drunk who doesn't know how to drive." The squad leader raised an eyebrow but said nothing as the Marine kept going. "So," I yelled, "Osama bin Laden dresses and acts like a frigid, mean-spirited lesbian." The Marine paused for dramatic effect before adding, and he yelled back, "Oh yeah!" "Well, so does Hillary Clinton." The squad leader stifled a laugh as the Marine finished his story. "And there we were," the Marine said, shaking his head, standing in the middle of the road, shaking hands when a truck hit us. So the Detroit Red Wings foreign scout flies to Baghdad to watch a young Iraqi play hockey in the new American-sponsored league and is suitably impressed and arranges for him to come over to the USA. Ken Holland signs him to a one-year contract, and the kid joins the team for the preseason. 2 weeks later, the Wings are down 4-0 to the Blackhawks with only 10 minutes left. Mike Babcock gives the young Iraqi the nod, and he goes in. The kid is a sensation, scores 5 goals in 10 minutes and wins the game for the Wings. The fans are delighted, the players and coaches are delighted, and the media love the new star. When the player comes off the ice, he phones his mom to tell her about his first day of NHL hockey. "Hello, Mom. Guess what?" he says in an Iraqi accent. "I played for 10 minutes today. We were down 4-0, but I scored 5 goals and we won. Everybody loves me. The fans, the media, they all love me." "Wonderful," says his mom. "Let me tell you about my day. Your father got shot in the street and robbed. Your sister and I were ambushed and beaten, and your brother has joined a gang of looters, and all while you were having such great time." The young Iraqi is very upset. "What can I say, Mom? But I'm so sorry." "Sorry? You're sorry?" says his mom. "It's your fault we moved to Detroit in the first place." So a Japanese company and an American company decided to have a canoe race on the Missouri River. Both teams practiced long and hard to reach their peak performance before the race. On the big day, the Japanese won by a mile. The Americans, very discouraged and depressed, decided to investigate the reason for the crushing defeat. A management team made up of senior management was formed to investigate and recommend appropriate action. Their conclusion was that the Japanese had 8 people rowing and 1 person steering, while the American team had 8 people steering and 1 person rowing. So American management hired a consulting company and paid them a large amount of money for a second opinion. They advised that too many people were steering the boat, while not enough people were rowing. To prevent another loss to the Japanese, the rowing team's management structure was totally reorganized to 4 steering supervisors, 3 area steering superintendents, and 1 assistant superintendent steering manager. They also implemented a new performance system that would give the 1 person rowing the boat greater incentive to work harder. It was called the Rowing Team Quality First Program, with meetings, dinners, and free pens for the rower. There was discussion of getting new paddles, canoes, and other equipment, and extra vacation days for practices and bonuses. The next year, the Japanese won by 2 miles. Humiliated, the American management laid off the rower for poor performance, halted development of a new canoe, sold the paddles, and canceled all capital investments for new equipment. The money saved was distributed to the senior executives as bonuses, and the next year's racing team was outsourced to India. So 3 guys, Asian, American, and a Mexican, are on a hot air balloon trying to get back home. Something punctured the hot air balloon, so now it's going down really fast. The 3 guys decided to throw stuff that they don't need away, so the balloon won't fall down too fast. The Asian threw away rice and said, "I have a lot of this in my country." The Mexican threw away beans and said, "I have a lot of this in my country." The American threw over the Mexican. The Asian was like, "Why did you do that for?" The American said, "We have a lot of these in my country." So an American goes to Asia for work and has lots of fun with the ladies there without using protection. A week upon return, his tool is turning purple. He visits his family doctor, who says he never saw this, sends him to a specialist. It's getting worse. It's purple halfway down. Specialist, also never seen this, unsure what treatment to issue, other than amputation before it spreads further. The specialist remembers an old Chinese doctor that might know what to do and sends him there. The old Chinese doctor says, yes, I've seen before. Like baby belly button, no need to amputate. It will fall off on its own. So, on the first day of school, a new student, the son of a Japanese businessman, joined a 4th grade class. The teacher started the lesson with some American history. Let's begin with a classic question. Who said, "Give me liberty," or "Give me death"? The class was silent, except for Suzuki, the new student, who raised his hand. Patrick Henry, 1775. Excellent, said the teacher. Now, who said government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth? Again, only Suzuki responded. Abraham Lincoln, 1863. The teacher looked at the rest of the class and said, "Class, you should be ashamed. Suzuki just moved here, and he already knows more American history than all of you." Then, a voice muttered from the back, "Damn Japanese." "Who said that?" demanded the teacher. Suzuki raised his hand. Lee Iacocca, 1982. At that, a student groaned. "Oh man, I'm gonna be sick." The teacher snapped. "All right, who said that?" Suzuki piped up again. George Bush to the Japanese Prime Minister, 1991. Now the class was getting irritated and another student shouted, "Oh yeah!" "Suck this." Suzuki jumped in. Bill Clinton to Monica Lewinsky, 1997. The teacher was beside herself and fainted. When she finally came to, she heard someone muttering, "We're in deep shit. Let's get out of here." Suzuki was already on his feet, hand raised, and proudly announced, "George W. Bush, commenting on the Iraq situation, 2005. So a lone cowboy nobody knew walks into a mining town bar. He orders 2 drinks, which he downs slowly. When he was done with his drinks, he paid the bartender and walks out to see that his horse with all his stuff is missing. He turns around, walks back in the bar, pulls his guns from his holster and shoots them in the air. "Whichever one of you cow dung stole my horse, Better have it back by the time I finish my next drink. Otherwise, I am going to have to do what I did in Texas. And trust me, I don't want to ever do that again. He walks back to the bar, gets another drink, and slowly drinks it. The people in the bar started murmuring, talking amongst themselves and looking at the stranger with fear in their eyes. The stranger finishes his drink, walks out, and his horse was there where he left it. He got up on it when the bartender and the bar patrons ran out after him. The bartender said, "Mister, we are sorry for what happened, but please tell us what happened in Texas after somebody stole your horse." The stranger looked at him and said, "I had to walk home." So three strangers strike up a conversation in the passenger lounge of Houston's airport, awaiting their flights. One is an American Indian passing through from Lame Deer. Another is a cowboy on his way to Billings for a livestock show. The third passenger is a fundamentalist Arab student, newly arrived at Texas State University from the Middle East. Their discussion drifts to their diverse cultures. Soon, the two Westerners learn that the Arab is a devout, radical Muslim, and the conversation falls into an uneasy lull. The cowboy leans back in his chair, crosses his boots on a magazine table, and tips his big, sweat-stained hat forward over his face. The wind outside is blowing tumbleweeds around, and the old windsock is flapping, but still, no plane comes. Finally, the American Indian clears his throat and softly speaks. "At one time here, my people were many, but sadly, now we are few." The Muslim student raises an eyebrow and leans forward. "Once my people were few." He sneers, "And now we are many. Why do you suppose that is?" The Texas cowboy shifts his toothpick to one side of his mouth and from the darkness beneath his Stetson says in a drawl, "That's 'cause we ain't played Cowboys and Muslims yet, but I do believe it's coming." So an Arab diplomat was visiting the United States for the first time, being wined and dined by the State Department. The Grand Emir wasn't accustomed to the salt in American food, French fries, cheese, and the like, and kept sending his servant Abdul to fetch glasses of water. Time and again, Abdul dutifully scurried off and returned with water. But after a while, he came back empty-handed. "Abdul, you son of an ugly camel, where is my water?" roared the Grand Emir. "1,000 pardons, sir," Abdul stammered. "But, sir, a man is sitting on the well." So an American and a Russian, who have sinned much in their life, both die in a car accident and go to hell at the same time. As they crossed over into the afterlife, they found themselves at the gates of hell. Satan himself greeted them, offering them a choice: American hell or Russian hell. The American was intrigued. "What's the difference?" he asked. Satan grinned. "In American hell, you're free to do whatever you want. We have all the finest amenities here in hell. Whatever your heart desires, you can find it here. But there's a catch. You have to eat a shovel full of manure each morning before you start your day." The Russian was unimpressed. "What about Russian hell?" he asked. Satan shrugged. "It's basically the same, but you have to eat 2 shovels full of manure before you start your day." The American didn't hesitate. "I'll take American hell," he said confidently. But the Russian surprised him by choosing Russian hell. Years passed, and the American settled into his routine in American hell. He played golf every day, hung out with friends at a swanky social club, and dined on delicious food every night. The only downside was the morning ritual of eating manure, but he learned to live with it. One day, he ran into the Russian in the afterlife. "Hey, my friend, how's it going?" he asked. The Russian looked around nervously. "Not so good," he whispered. "This is Russian hell, remember?" The American looked confused. "What's so bad about it?" he asked. The Russian sighed. "Most of the time, there's no shovel, and the rest of the time, there's no manure." So Barack Obama walks into a bar, but he is invisible. After attracting the bartender's attention, the bartender says, "Okay, I'll bite." "Why are you invisible?" Barack says, "Well, I found a bottle on the beach, and then I rubbed it. And then, importantly, a genie came out. The genie said I could have 3 wishes. For my first wish, I said, let me say this, and this is profoundly important. I want Michelle to marry me. I love her, and I think America will love her too." That wish was granted. For my second wish, I said, like all patriotic Americans, I am deeply patriotic, and I want to be president of the United States so I can serve my country. That wish was granted too. And then, for my third wish, I started by saying, let me be clear. So a British doctor brags to his colleagues, "In Britain, medicine is so advanced that we removed a man's backbone, put it in another man, and in 6 weeks, he was looking for work." A German surgeon replies, "That's nothing. In Germany, we removed a section of a brain, put it in another man, and in 4 weeks, he was looking for work." A Russian doctor says, "Gentlemen, we took a beating heart from one man, put it in another's chest, and in 2 weeks, he started a new job." The American doctor sighs and says, "You're all behind us. Just a few months ago, we took a man with no brain, no heart, and no backbone, and he got a job overnight as our president." So a man is sitting in the bar at a busy airport. A beautiful woman walks in and sits down next to him. He presumes, because she's got a uniform on. So he decides to have a go at picking her up by identifying the airline she flies for, thereby impressing her greatly. He leans across to her and says the Delta Airline motto, "We love to fly and it shows." The woman looks at him blankly. He sits back and thinks up another. He leans forward again and delivers the Air France's motto, "Winning the hearts of the world." Again, she just stares at him with a slightly puzzled look on her face. Undeterred, he tries again, this time saying the Malaysian Airlines motto, "Going beyond expectations." The woman looks at him warily and says, "What the heck do you want, moron?" "Ah," he says, sitting back with a smile on his face. "American Airlines." So 3 men were sitting at a veteran's bar talking. One was American, one was English, and one was African. At some point, the American said, "Did you know that our Air Force is so big that when all our planes are out flying, we can't even see the sun?" "That's nothing," scoffed the Englishman. "Our Navy is so huge that if we line up all our boats, we can walk on a straight line all the way from England to America without getting wet feet." After a short while, the African said, "One day, when I was taking a piss in the forest, 14 crows landed on my pecker at the same time. That was when they all realized that maybe, just maybe, they all overexaggerated." The American admitted, "Well, maybe we do see the sun shining through." And Englishman answered, "And we actually have to swim a bit to reach the American shoreline." And the African said, "And those 14 crows, well, They were sitting pretty close together. So, an Englishman, an American, and a Japanese are doing whitewater rafting when all of a sudden they spot a huge drop to a waterfall they never knew was there. They are moments away from plunging over a waterfall to their doom. Suddenly, a genie appears. The genie explains that he is the spirit of the waterfall, and he is of limited power. He cannot prevent their inevitable deaths, but he can grant each man one wish before he dies. The American steps up first. I love my country. Before I die, I want to sing my national anthem one last time. The full version. Give my friends lyric sheets so they can join in. I want a full backing orchestra and a gospel choir. It will be done, says the genie. The Japanese goes next. I love my country too. Nothing represents it better than our wonderful cuisine. Please let me taste one more time the delicacies of my village. I want fermented sticky soybeans, fresh sea urchin, raw horse meat, pickled seaweed, sugared omelets, and please provide enough so I can share the meal with my friends. It will be done, says the genie. The Englishman quietly approaches the genie and whispers in his ear, just send me over the waterfall before the bloody song starts and the food gets here. So a man and his wife, who had a wooden leg, moved back home to North Carolina from Texas. Now, back in Texas, it cost them $2,000 a year to insure that leg. When they got to North Carolina, they decided to check with a local insurance agency to see how much it would cost to insure the leg there. The agent pulls up the information on his computer, looks at them, and says, "That'll be $39. The husband is floored. $39? He exclaims. We were paying $2,000 a year in Texas. Why is it so cheap here? The agent, trying not to laugh, turns his screen around and says, well, according to the system, any wooden structure with a sprinkler system over it is $39. So Jim needs a job and has no qualms about inventing the necessary qualifications. He reasons that once he finds work, he will impress the boss so much that everything will be forgiven. After a successful initial interview at the Encyclopedia of American History, he is called back to meet the sales manager. You say you have experience selling books? Lots of it, replies Jim. And you have a master's in American history from the University of Michigan? Correct, replies Jim. History is my field of study. Well, then, says the sales manager, as soon as I can complete this form, we can get you started in the firm. While the sales manager is making a few notations, Jim, obviously pleased with himself, begins to whistle. Looking around the room, he notices pictures of Washington and Lincoln on the walls. Pointing to the portraits, he turns to the sales manager and says, fine-looking men, are those your partners? So an American businessman was in Rome, and with only a few days left on his trip, he decided he wanted to see the Pope. He went to the Vatican and waited in line for a long time. Finally, the Pope emerged and began making his way down the line. The businessman, dressed in his finest Armani suit and Italian leather shoes, hoped the Pope would notice him. To his disappointment, the Pope passed right by without so much as a glance. His dismay deepened when, just a few meters down the line, the Pope stopped in front of a decrepit local tramp, leaned forward, and whispered something in the tramp's ear. In a moment of frustration, the businessman approached the tramp and offered to trade his Armani suit for the tramp's shabby outfit. The tramp readily agreed. The next day, the businessman returned to the Vatican, dressed in the tramp's clothes and looking and smelling like a homeless bum. He waited in line again until the Pope appeared. This time, the Pope noticed him immediately, walked straight up, leaned forward, and whispered in his ear, "I thought I told you to piss off." So, an American was driving in rural Ireland when he spotted a farmer digging in his field with a spade. He stopped and asked the farmer about the size of his farm. "Well," so replied the farmer, "it borders this road, and you see that tall tree 5 fields over. Well, that's one boundary, and you see the cows in the field about 4 fields away over there. Well, that's another boundary, and the river bounds it in the other direction." "Gee," said the American back in Texas, "I can get into my car at dawn, drive all day, and at sunset, I'm still driving on my own farm." The farmer replied, "I used to have an old car like that myself one time." So, a Texan walks into an Irish pub and says, "I heard your Irishmen really like your Guinness. You know what? I'm gonna give $500 American to the guy who can drink 10 pints of Guinness in a go. Does anybody accept?" The pub falls dead silent, and one gentleman even gets up and leaves. Said gentleman returns 10 minutes later and asks the Texan, "Hey, is your bet still standing?" "Yes," replies the Texan. The gentleman then tells the bartender to pour him 10 pints of Guinness, and to the bewilderment of everyone, including the Texan, finishes it in one go. The Texan then asks him, "Don't mind me asking, but where were you those 10 minutes?" The man replies, "Well, I went to the pub across the street. I had to know if I could actually do it." So a Texan is visiting his friend in Sydney. They go out sightseeing. The Australian shows him the harbor bridge, and the Texan says, "Back in Texas, we could build a bridge like that in 2 weeks." The Australian then shows him Ste. Mary's Cathedral, and the Texan says, "Back home, we could throw up a building like that in maybe a week." Frustrated, the Australian takes him to the Sydney Opera House. "Wow," says the Texan. "What's that?" "No idea, mate," says the Aussie. "It wasn't there yesterday." So my dyslexic blonde girlfriend just said, "How do we know which of the other 49 states are real?" I said, "What?" "They're all real." She said, "No, they're not. We only know for certain that one is real. No one's certain about the other ones. Just like the saying goes." Now, very confused, I reply, "What saying?" She looks at me like I'm an idiot and replies confidently, "You know only 2 things are certain in life: death and Texas."